Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're updating you on what's going on with the bar exam and COVID-19. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And then with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today, we're back with some updates on postponements and other things that have happened since the last time we spoke. Well, Lee, we last recorded a podcast about the bar and COVID-19. I know it seems like a year ago, but I think it was March 18th, which is about 3 weeks ago because today is April 10th.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that seems a lot longer ago than 3 weeks ago. I'll be honest.
It does, right? At that point, we were kind of speculating about what might happen with the July 2020 bar. I think we said basically, hey, it looks unlikely this is going to go forward, particularly in some of these jurisdictions, but it also seems kind of unlikely it's going to be canceled. And so far, that's basically what's happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has happened since March 18th. I think that we have started to see jurisdictions both, make firm plans about what's going to happen or make squishy plans or, move the dates, just say that there's going to be a delay, but not be very specific. So there's a lot going on around the country. And I think if you're sitting for the bar, you need to make sure that you're on top of stuff so you can get the best information about your own jurisdiction because stuff is changing literally every day. In fact, Alison was just saying that a bunch of updates came out later last night.
Right.
I hadn't seen until this morning. So we have, to help everybody out, created a COVID-19 information page on the Bar Exam Toolbox website that we will be updating on a daily basis. So that can make it, give you guys an easy place to do some one-stop checking. And we'll link to that page in our show notes.
Yeah, you can also go straight to the Conference of Bar Examiners like we talked about last time. So we'll link to that too. But yeah, I mean, this is something you definitely want to be on top of because, as you said, it's literally changing day by day. And so right now, the options people have, because the Conference of Bar Examiners did announce that they have committed to a fall bar exam. They actually, interestingly enough, have not fully committed to a July bar exam yet. They're going to make that announcement in early May. And I think they're kind of waiting to see what these jurisdictions are doing and how many decide to move to the fall. And then they've announced 2 different fall dates that states can pick from for the UBE. Although I guess actually it even applies to other states because of the MBE situation. So basically September 9th and 10th or September 30th and October 1st. And different states have committed to different ones. The first one seems more popular right now, but there are some outliers. So yeah. And, who knows if these are even going to be possible, I guess is the other thing that, some states have kind of hedged on that and said, well, if this fall date turns out not to be possible because we still can't do it, we're going to look at other options. So there are a lot of things floating around kind of in the ether about ideas and should there be a diploma privilege, and certain states have said, okay, we'll let people practice until they're able to take the bar and, all these different things. So you want to be aware of what your rules are.
Yeah, I think New Jersey was the first one to come out with that idea, at least in writing. And they said that recent graduates are going to be able to do limited practice under the supervision of a licensed attorney, but they have to take the next bar offered and they have to pass that bar in order to keep this kind of status. And, I thought, I'm not a huge fan of blanket diploma privilege, but I thought that was kind of a nice workaround because this has business ramifications for a lot of people. One, people have jobs and the firms are counting on people being able to work as lawyers for their budgets. You've got people who need to be able to make money. I mean, there's so many things that are relying on this date. And if they don't give the bar until September or October, it's going to be a while before they can even get results. It's really going to delay people being able to work if they don't do some sort of kind of workaround for the situation.
Right. I think it's even more of an issue outside of the firm context because they're kind of used to okay, you can come and do some stuff and someone else just signs off on it. But think about someone who's going to be like a public defender.
True.
My law school roommate was a public defender in New Orleans, and she says literally on day one, she walked in and they handed her 100 cases. And she was like, what do I do? They're like, you're due in court in 20 minutes. Like,
good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that. So people like that like really need to be able to actually practice. So I agree. I think it's a pretty good workaround. I think there's an exception if you need to postpone the bar for one cycle and you have some good reason. I think they'll do that. But, so it's not an indefinite type of thing. But I think it strikes a good balance between, competing priorities here.
Yeah. Because it gets really complicated. I think a lot of people hear the diploma privilege and just say, well, if you graduate from ABA school, you're good to go. But that gets really complicated in these jurisdictions with high failure rates.
Right.
Because then it's like, okay, well, if generally speaking, 50% of the people in the room are going to fail and you're going to grandfather everyone in, and what about the people who are taking it for the third or fourth time? Do they get grandfathered in?
Right.
Because they've already failed once, they don't get grandfathered in? I mean, there are a lot of complicated issues, to weigh, I think, especially in these jurisdictions where they fail a huge number of people.
Yeah, I think you have some equity issues of, well, I failed once. Does that mean that, I did the same education as someone you're going to give this diploma privilege to? Why shouldn't I get that too?
Right.
I think these are hard questions.
Yeah. And I think that this morning on our Slack group, one of our tutors was mentioning that even New York is not guaranteeing that everyone who wants to take it may be able to take it.
Right.
Which I was kind of like, oh no. For some reason, that really struck me. I'm like, oh my gosh, how are people going to be able to make sure if they need to sit for the test that they can sit for the test if there are only going to be so many seats? And I think maybe in larger jurisdictions, this could also be a problem for places like California where, 5,000, 6,000 people sometimes sit for the bar. I don't know how many people were going to sit this year. But that's that's almost anxiety inducing to me. So how are they going to pick? Is it going to be in-state attorneys? Is it going to be ABA schools? Is it going to be no foreign attorneys? Is it going to be repeat? I think there's a lot, again, of squishiness, which is why people need to be very aware of what's happening, because if there are a limited number of seats and you want to sit for that bar, you may need to file to hold your spot like as soon as possible or as soon as they allow you to do that.
Oh, yeah. I think anyone who is sure where they're going to sit should be on top of these deadlines. And the second that opens, you need, and they were basically talking about doing some type of metering. So, as soon as your group opens, I think you obviously want to be applying as soon as you can. Yeah, because I think there are just going to be logistical challenges. They may not be able to hold this in a place that they've normally held it where they have a lot of seats. I think in the UBE context, it's also possible certain states who, if places do end up having the bar in July, maybe limiting, out-of-state applicants and things like that, because, with the UBE, you can sit anywhere. So the obvious, my first thought was, if New York doesn't let you sit, but Nevada does, just go take it in Nevada. And I'm sure that thought has occurred to a lot of people. So I think you could see issues there where states that are going to go ahead and have it don't want a ton of out-of-state people who just want to get that score sitting for it. Right.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think that this is such a new situation that they're really going to have to, the states are getting creative, but then everybody really needs to figure out how they can make the system work for them. By the way, Nevada is not a UBE state.
Sorry, as soon as I said that, I was like, wait, Nevada is probably not the right choice.
I was just had a moment. I just double checked because I was like, I think Nevada, we just had a tutor sit for the Nevada bar.
Right, which is why it was in my head. And I was thinking, wait a second, as soon as I said it, scratch that. Nevada is not a UB state. Go to Arizona.
Washington.
Go to Arizona. No, Arizona still is scheduled for July. Yeah, sorry about that, people. Don't take
This is why you have to stay so on top of things. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So again, I mean, this is, we're recording this on April 10th. Every day new information is coming out. But Alison, should we give people just a snapshot of what we've heard from some jurisdictions so far?
Yeah. So I'm looking at the National Conference of Bar Examiners page. So on this page, the states that currently have announced that they are not having the July bar, but they are planning to do it either in September or some just say the fall and haven't actually picked between the two dates. So you've got Alaska, Connecticut, Guam, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Vermont. And then you have these people who've come out with some rule changes, but say they're still currently planning to do the bar in July, but there are different rules that people should be aware of, which would be Tennessee and Indiana, and Arizona. So it's kind of a motley mix. It seems like the more popular date is that September 9th date, but definitely I know Massachusetts has announced that they're not going to be able to do it that day because they can't get a space. So they have committed to the later September date.
Okay. Which I guess at least by having these states start to anchor with these two options, I mean, they're going to force the hand of the National Conference of Bar Examiners to really offer it on these two dates. It's not
right.
Well, I wonder if they would offer it if just Massachusetts was, doing it. So,
well, I think they have committed, at least at this point, to offering both of those September dates. I think the open question right now is if they're going to offer their materials for July. Yeah. And my guess on that is they're really waiting for what California does.
Yeah, I think that that's true because California is such a big jurisdiction.
Right.
California, I think, is trying to move quickly. I think especially given...
I think they've been meeting today, aren't they?
I think it might be today. So as soon as we get word about California, we will probably do another podcast update because that will impact so many people. But California is trying to get word out quickly because, people are going to get results in May, and they really need to be able to start preparing for this reality. I mean, we're talking to a lot of people who are considering studying for the summer bar in California who maybe have taken a break or are kind of coming back to it. And it's a tough time to try and make these choices. So I think certainty is going to be great. And I agree. I think the NCBE will have to react to whatever California decides. And then I think once California decides, a bunch of states are going to get in line and decide which direction to go.
Right, because at some point they don't have enough people taking it to scale the scores.
Right.
So, if basically New York and California are out along with, pick a couple of other large jurisdictions, at some point you just don't have enough people. Yeah. So I think that's what the bar examiners are waiting for, is just seeing, are we going to have enough people to scale a July test?
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll find that out soon.
Hopefully we'll find that out soon.
They have committed to an early May date for making that decision.
They have, yeah, which is great. And there are white papers going around. There's a lot of discussion about the options, but hopefully we're going to get, specific information very soon.
Yeah, because people are already getting results in some of these other states.
Yeah, a lot of results came out this week, actually.
Yeah, actually. So it's hard to advise people on what to do when we literally don't know when your exam is going to happen yet.
Yeah, it really is. But I think a lot of people are going to find themselves in a situation that their jurisdiction is postponed in some way. And so one of the things we wanted to kind of talk about was what you should do if you find yourself in this position, because there are a lot of ramifications to not being able to sit for the bar in July.
Yeah.
And definitely. I think the first thing that people really need to start thinking about is, what are you going to do about your finances? Because, we don't know what the state of the world will be, but most law graduates just can't sit around twiddling their thumbs until the fall, right? Because some of them used to take out, or still do, take out bar loans to just cover part of the summer when they needed to study. But now we're not talking about 10 weeks. We could be talking about 20 weeks or more. Right. How are you going to afford to live for 20 weeks? Are you going to pay rent? Are you going to move? Are you going to be able to move back with your family? I mean, maybe you're already living with your family since every law school's gone remote, but you've really got to think about how you're going to survive and wait out the bar process.
Yeah, and some of those jobs that typically people who are studying for the bar and really needed income could do are not going to be available. So, I had a friend, for example, in New York who would wait tables at night and then study during the day. You can't wait tables right now anywhere, really.
No, I mean,
you can't drive for Uber. You just there's a lot of these options that you normally would rely on to just get some cash flowing are probably, certainly at this point, not options and may not be for the future. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a really serious problem for a lot of people.
I think it will. I also think that, that sometimes law graduates would get doc review jobs and things like that, which may still be available, but there are also probably soon going to be some out-of-work lawyers that are also going to try and go get those jobs as well. So those jobs are also going to be incredibly competitive. So I think thinking about money is probably the first thing that you need to do. You need to look at your loans. You need to decide if you're going to try and take out more money. You need to ask for support if you have people who can support you. But if you don't, then you're going to have to get creative and think about the lowest cost way to do this.
Yeah, and I think, too, if you do have a job lined up, it's worth at least reaching out to them. I know, for example, I did what they called at that point pre-clerking, when I was studying for the bar. So I worked like half the summer at a law firm and got some income and then took the rest of the summer off to study. Who knows if those options are going to be available, but I think it's worth at least asking, hey, can I work for 2 months and then, study for 2 months? Maybe your organization is like, yeah, we'd love to have you come and do that. And like, we can basically fund you for 2 months and then you can use that money when you're studying.
Yeah. Probably too, most people defer their loans because of the bar start date and things like that. But you probably, if you have a lot of school loans, you probably need to talk to your financial aid office and try and figure out what is going to happen with those, because the last thing you want is those bills coming due in the fall. I know the feds are trying to like freeze interest rates on some things. I mean, there's maybe some tiny relief coming, but you need to make sure you're on top of that as well, because you don't want to get behind on your loans or get your credit flagged or anything like that due to this situation.
Well, if nothing else, you can probably put them in like temporary income-based repayment and your income is zero. So right,
that's true.
But you need to reach out early to your loan providers about these options. And obviously, I'm sure they're going to be responsive. Well, not obviously, they're loan providers. I would hope that they're going to be responsive to this situation because it's not something that is your fault.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is out of most everyone's control. How we're reacting is not out of everyone's control, but those of us who are, if you are not in control when the bar exam starts, you are not in control about what can happen with your job.
Right.
So that's the big thing. And I think that even while you're waiting for your jurisdiction to decide what to do, you have the opportunity to do this research and start getting your ducks in a row. So if you're wondering what you can do while you're waiting, this is the big one. I think this is what you can do while you're waiting.
Right. And to just think creatively about your housing situation too, because for most people, that is obviously your biggest, source of money flowing out. So, is there a way you could use a spare room in a friend's house? I mean, again, you've got the shelter in place problems. Maybe they don't want a random person moving in with them, but, at least think about these things.
Right. So I think once you kind of get your finances in order, and maybe once you know more about what date is set, then you need to decide on a study plan. And your study plan might look a little bit different. If you haven't already paid for a bar review provider, you may want to look at all your options to make sure that you are maybe not investing money that you need for something else in your bar review provider. You also may end up doing some part-time work and end up working and studying, which a lot of recent graduates don't do. That's okay, because in this situation, you may have almost twice as much time to study. So working and studying, I think, could be a viable option for a lot of folks if that's what happens for you, but you have to plan for it. You need to start early and you need to be able to manage your time well. So that's something that you also may want to consider. I think one of the biggest problems for a lot of folks is if you are at home and you have children or family responsibilities, you're homeschooling your children, you may not be able to study like you thought you would. You may not be able to study full time. We also are not 100% sure when or if children in every jurisdiction will go back to school in August. And if that doesn't happen, then I think that's a whole new challenge for a lot of people who are going to be studying. So that makes me kind of err on the side that if you're running through these scenarios that you're going to have a lot of responsibilities leading into the fall, I would just go ahead and start studying this summer and bank time. Be over-prepared. You got to be thoughtful. We're going to talk about burnout and things like that in a minute. But since we don't know what's coming down the pipeline, I think you want to be conservative in how much time you may have to study.
Right. And particularly if you're trying to fit that time in around these other responsibilities, which, are A, time consuming, but just B, they're so exhausting. Anyone who's trying to manage like everyone being home and their kids being home, by the end of the day, it's really hard to see how you're going to have the bandwidth to do, 3 hours of study. It's just like, who has that amount of like capacity at this point?
No.
So I think, if you have kids and obligations, this is definitely something that you've got to get pretty realistic about what your time is going to look like. And, as we said, I think on the last podcast, maybe you just go ahead and call it and you're like, I'm going to skip this next one. There's too much uncertainty and I'm just going to commit to taking the February exam.
Yeah, which is totally fine. And then come up with a plan for that, but just make a decision so you don't run yourself into the ground. I think this is a lot to hold. This time is a lot to hold for everyone. And so we're not all performing at our best. I don't know anyone who's like, I'm rocking this shelter in place quarantine COVID situation.
No.
Maybe some people on Instagram, but other than that, no one in my circle is like, I got this. This is amazing.
Full steam ahead.
Full steam ahead.
I saw a really interesting article from an academic who is from some like war-torn country and has gone through similar things like this and is a successful academic. And her point was literally, it was just like, and this was in the very early days and weeks of this, where she's like, you cannot do your work normally right now. Like what you need to do is get your life in order, like get everything set for you and your people and make sure that's stable. And then at some point you can kind of come out of that and start to figure out ways to do work. And it is possible, but it's not going to be like full on high productivity particularly not, in the first weeks of all of this.
No, I mean, I personally really struggle with this, because I kept telling you I wasn't getting stuff done.
But hey, we're making progress now. We're a month in or whatever.
But it really, like, I was having trouble focusing. I was out of my element. I'm managing my family and how they're managing, our quarantine shelter in place situation. I'm worried about people. I'm worried about people in my network that I care about. We're doing essential tasks. And it's taken me a while to feel like I have the thoughtful part of my brain that, writes curriculum and does stuff like that to be really able to engage, because this load is a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I think everyone needs to think about how are they going to customize their needs and customize their schedule. I think even more so than normal, you cannot just plan to sign up for like a standard bar prep program and get a schedule and follow that schedule. It's just not going to happen. Obviously you also want to look at what type of schedules are they even providing you. We do customized stuff for all of our students, so that's not an issue. But, if you're just signed up, are they still just going to hand you 10 weeks? Is it going to be spread out over a longer time? And for certain people, I think having more time is really a benefit. If you are someone who has struggled in law school or you're coming from a different background, if you're a foreign lawyer, assuming you're able to actually sit for it, all these things, like there actually are people that I've spoken with recently where I'm like, this is not a bad thing for you,
True. Yeah. Even folks who, get accommodations for things like attention deficit, or they always find that they need extra time to be able to do some of this work. This may be a situation where you actually get the benefit of some extra study time. You're not grinding these 12-hour days to get this work done. And I think for a lot of people, this really could be a benefit, but you have to make sure that you're not wasting your extra time.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be committed. Even if you're doing, 5 or 6 hours a day instead of 10 or 12 hours a day, you still have to wake up and do solid work, active work in that time frame. I think it's very easy to just say, oh, I'll start tomorrow, or that's not going to get you to pass the bar.
No. Yeah. All right. So I think the next thing that people need to really internalize, that even if there's a date that is set, there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty. I'm doing better at not reading as much news. I kind of read it in the morning. I read it in the evening. Maybe sometimes I indulge myself with an update in the middle of the day.
Well, we just published a post on the Girls Guide to Law School. You can go read about going on a media diet.
I know. It's totally not going to happen, but it sounds great in theory. I'm doing much better than I was
like
before.
Any other diet, right? Like, exactly. Sounds great. I'm going to definitely follow that, except this one little thing.
Right. Except we're having s'mores this weekend. So it's one of our exciting things. But, we don't know what's coming down the line because the news is constantly changing, right? I mean, one day you're like, this is going to peak in May. The next day it's like, well, no, it's going to peak in June. Oh, there's a lot, and the uncertainty is still going to continue. And the way that the government continues to kind of roll out their plans, if everyone hasn't seen the pattern, is they don't tell us the long-term plan. They're telling us like 2 weeks at a time. So, there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty. So you've got to also make your plans with a little bit of flexibility, because you can't always assume that the current situation is going to last. Even if you're like, okay, we got the shelter in place down, I'm making this work, I have this other job, I'm good to go, but then things could still change. We don't know.
Right. I mean, we don't know what type of restrictions you're going to be looking at in a few months. So it's totally possible that, your state might commit to July and then sort of last minute decide they can't do that, or be told they can't do that by the government. The state government might come in and say, you know what, we don't think gathering all these people makes sense. You cannot do this. or even in September, like we said, like, people are kind of guessing. So
yeah,
I think it's the same advice that we provided in the first podcast is like, if your state sets a date, prepare as if that date is happening, but it might not happen. That's just what we have to kind of sit with.
Yeah, that is where we are. So that is where we are. So we talked about needing to talk to your job if you have a job. Hopefully they're thinking about this uncertainty and saying, are you going to be able to start work early, work remotely? Are they going to give you time off to study for the exam? Can you delay your start date? You need to start having these conversations and reaching out to people. I think, we're now, many places are in week 3, week 4. This is the time where I think people are kind of saying, okay, we know enough that this isn't going away. So we're starting to plan for the future.
Right. And depending on the job, probably there will be very different answers. I mean, even looking at what law firms are doing with their summer associate programs, they're taking very different paths. So,
right.
You kind of want to get on that path and find out what your options are as soon as possible.
Yep. And just like we were talking about actually asking questions of your law school, sometimes jobs may not have even thought of certain scenarios. That's one of the reasons why you have to ask questions, because sometimes they're like, oh, I haven't thought about this situation where XYZ is happening.
Yeah, we've been really wondering about what we're going to do tomorrow and how that's going to work. We haven't really thought about what will happen if you're not sitting for the bar until September.
Right. So you can't demand answers, but you can thoughtfully ask for them.
Well, and I think a lot of it realistically depends on what the economy looks like between now and then. I mean,
Yeah.
And again, we don't know that right now.
We do not know. We do not know. We have a lot of resources on our website, and I think we'll link to some of them on this podcast. And we've got other podcast episodes about long-term study and the benefits and challenges of that. If you haven't really planned for long-term study, I do think that you want to keep in mind that burnout is a really big thing to watch for. And so we'll probably do more episodes in the future on this as well. And we just did one recently on kind of studying long-term, but you have to be aware that you can't study 12 hours a day for 4 months. Most people will go completely cuckoo. So you have to have a plan that includes balance. And a lot of folks' self-care options have become really limited. I know that I'm feeling this, like all the things that I do to kind of like
can't go to yoga, can't get a massage,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like
barely can go on a
can't
walk
see your friends,
block.
can't go to happy hour, can't, like there are a lot of things that are kind of taken away from us. I mean, the Europeans in France just restricted people. They can't even go outside to jog anymore between the hours of 10 and 7. So, you can't count on the things that we usually count on for self-care. And that's another thing that I think people have to be very aware about when managing this. Studying for the bar is a stressful situation in the best of circumstances.
Right.
And here we're not in the best of circumstances. So it's something else I think people are going to have to be very thoughtful about.
Yeah, and I think just commit even more than normal to really having some sort of self-care routine in place. If you have a therapist, can you talk to them virtually once a week? If you like to do yoga, can you do a yoga class in your house? I mean, I'm totally do as I say, not as I do, because I will admit I have not done a single yoga class in my house since it started.
I did one, but I did do some yoga on my own last night. And then I realized that I hadn't moved my back in those ways in a really long time and was like, maybe I should do more yoga.
Yeah, no, I started only a couple of days ago. I started doing a tiny little bit, but I will link to this amazing neck stretch that has been completely transformative for me. I'm not sure if you actually tried it. I know I sent it to you.
I haven't tried it yet. You did send it to me. I haven't tried it yet.
You should do it. It's so good.
Okay, I'll do it today. I'll do it today.
We're going to link to it because it is truly amazing. And it made my neck and shoulders, which were searing in pain basically all of the time. It just made them release. And so I think this is a good one to have in your self-care toolbox.
Nice. Got to have a lot. Got to have a lot of things in the toolbox to pull from.
It's very easy. It takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to dive into is that if you are looking at the bar exam on top of everything else that is going on in the world, one of your jobs is to try and stay calm, which I think is which is a really high order. I take walks as my self-care, and I started listening to Brene Brown's new podcast, which is, we're big fans of hers anyway, but her podcast is brand new. They were going to do a big launch at South by Southwest, and then there was no South by Southwest, so they decided to launch it anyway. And she was talking about how she had built this fancy podcast studio, but then she was actually in her son's closet on top of dirty clothes doing her podcast because she can't go to her office. So there are a lot of interesting things just because, she's again trying to do something new and hard at this time. But one of her first episodes is around this idea of FFTs, which are her effing first times. And she talks about COVID-19, and she raises this as something that I think she teaches and writes about, of this idea that every time we really take on something new, things that we've never done before, that there are certain challenges and there are certain ways to keep it in perspective. And she applied these to COVID-19 for herself because she said, most of us have never lived through a global pandemic before. So this is a collective FFT. And so what she says that you have to do to get through an FFT is, one, you have to normalize it and realize that even though you don't know what to do, nobody knows what to do right now because this is so new. And that all of the emotions that you are having around COVID-19 and what's happening to you with the bar exam are normal and okay. Things like being anxious and afraid and stressed, all of that stuff. But you have to name it and kind of normalize it. In fact, in children, when we talk about managing children's emotions, they would say name it to tame it. But if you acknowledge these emotions and name them, it gives them less power because these are all normal things to feel. So you normalize it, and then you've got to put it into perspective because, we do know that someday there will be another bar exam. You will get a law license. This will all work out. It just may be pretty murky as we get there. But I think it can be very hard. I know I'm one of those people who's like, this is the way life is going to be forever. And then my husband will be like, this is not how it's going to be forever. And I was like, it feels like this is how it's going to be forever. It's so easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially lawyers, we're worst case scenario people, right? So I'm like, in my worst case scenario brain, this is it. Life is now this. Alison and I are never going to go get to have working lunches at a coffee shop ever again.
I know. I walked past one of our favorite coffee shops yesterday and was just like, oh, I wonder if they're going to ever reopen.
I know.
In fact, I think it's the last place we actually met for lunch because I remember we were sanitizing the table and thinking maybe we shouldn't even be having this lunch.
That's true. Yeah, that was like right before. I think that was the week before they shut the schools at the end of the week. You asked which one of us was going to sanitize the table. I do remember that. So, keeping some sort of perspective, and I think for lawyers especially, that's very hard for us. And so we have to kind of, take a moment for that. And the third thing that she recommends is to reality check your expectations for yourself, your expectations for those around us. I think a lot of us want certainty and answers and saying like, if they set the bar on September 9th, I am taking the bar on September 9th. But certainty does not exist. And we just have to adjust our expectations that we're probably not going to get the certainty that we want right now because it doesn't really exist. Even if they say they're going to do the bar in September, there is still a chance that they won't be able to. And that has to be okay. Which makes me, like, in my gut, it makes my, stomach churn because that's not how I like to live my life. But, that's why we have to talk about this stuff so we can sit with it and just get used to this new reality. But I thought it was a helpful framework. I found the podcast helpful. We'll link to it in the show notes. I think Brene Brown is a wise woman, but I also think she just presents things in a way that are easily digestible and practical, which I always kind of appreciate.
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. I've heard good things about that podcast. So maybe I'll break my never listening to podcast life plan and listen to one. No, it reminds me a little bit of when I was in Mexico, living in Mexico City, and there was a major earthquake. And obviously, people had very strong reactions to that. And I remember I was in a group at one point and someone said, oh, we're all suffering from PTSD because people were having nightmares and, all this stuff. And someone who was a psychologist was like, actually, no, you're not suffering from PTSD. You're literally in the stressful situation. And these are all totally normal reactions. There's nothing to worry about here. This will stop. And they were right. It did. But it was actually a useful thing because you're like, oh my gosh, this is never going to end. I'm going to be having nightmares forever and waking up and, hearing sounds and freaking out. And they're like, no, this is a normal stress reaction. So I think a lot of the stuff that people are going through now about not being able to sleep and maybe not eating or, eating too much or just feeling totally out of sorts. These are all really normal. And, you just kind of have to feel them. I think it's, Martha Begg's always like, you got to feel the emotion or it's not going to go away. So,
right.
All of these things are great opportunities to practice these life skills.
It's true. And every day we put one foot in front of the other and we are closer to the end, and I think that when I was dealing with a grief a couple years ago, I read an article that talked about the grief is a river and that although there may be strong currents and you may not go very fast, someday you will get to the other side. And that imagery for me has always been very powerful because it's like, even if it's a tiny step, you're just one little step closer to it being a little bit easier, to get to the other side. I mean, grief never fully goes away. It just becomes more manageable. But I think that this idea that we are marching towards something, it's unfortunately, we just don't know where that other side is.
Right.
It's a hard place to be.
It is a hard place to be. And I think with the bar exam, I think people also should feel totally free just to take a step back and kind of compartmentalize this and just put it to the side for now, based on the fact that you really don't have a ton of information. So, we're giving you all this advice. You run out and do all this stuff. And you may be listening to this thinking, I can't even conceive of doing any of these things right now.
Right.
And that is totally fine. This is not a huge rush.
No, this is not a time to try and be perfect and to try and do absolutely everything, It's just too much to ask. We're asking a lot of ourselves to just manage the situations that we're in.
Yeah, so I think if you are feeling like I'm so overwhelmed by even hearing about all of this, it's just stressing me out, just focus on your other stuff for now. If you're in school, focus on getting through school. If you're at a job, focus on your job. If you're doing whatever, focus on whatever. You don't need to deal with all of this stuff tomorrow.
Right. All right. Well, with that, I just hope people can take a deep breath. I feel like we have to take like a collective deep breath.
Exactly. Deep breath.
I know, deep breath. But I think everybody's got to take a deep breath and, just realize that the information will come, that you will have time to make plans, and that this is a great exercise in sitting with uncertainty.
Right.
Yeah. Which is terrible, but that's where we are. But maybe it's a new life skill. I don't know. Every time I've had to live within uncertainty, I guess I've gained new life skills. So we can just hope that we have new life skills.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we hope everybody hangs in there. And we want to take a second to remind you as we finish up to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. Another reminder, we will have that COVID-19 page up where we can link to getting more information. So you can always check back there if you want one-stop information that we've seen come through the interwebs. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.